Distinguished moderator, keynote speakers, fellow panelists, and our Zoom audience, greetings from the University of the West Indies. And my thanks to the president of the AAU for the invitation to participate in this homecoming event. Caribbean people have always embraced the opportunity, not just to visit the motherland, but to engage in what we call intellectual repatriation and reconnecting, because of the attempt by colonizers to dismantle the bridge of connection. So I interpret homecoming in a broad sense. On this side of the Atlantic, we embrace Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah's words, "I am not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me." Of course, the influence of Caribbean Pan-Africanists like Mwalimu Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Henry Sylvester Williams, and others was obvious on our leaders and our brothers and sisters on the African continent. This philosophy has been understood by the staff and students at universities in South Africa, Ghana, and in Nigeria, at which I have spoken, and in which the University of the West Indies now has institutional links through specific centers that we have established, as well as by academics and Pan-African advocates with whom I have interacted on visits to Ethiopia, Morocco, Egypt, Mauritius, Senegal, and Madeira. Of course, we still have to work on the fractured parts of the bridge we are seeking to repair, because colonialists have partially succeeded in peddling myths about Africa to the Caribbean, and colonialist education has not facilitated enough inclusion about our region in the curricula in many African countries, many African educational institutions, even at the tertiary level, increasing the level of lack of knowledge in the larger society. This was evident to the team of which I was a part, the team that was invited by former South African President Thabo Mbeki to sensitize South Africans about the Caribbean, and especially about Haiti, ahead of offering sanctuary to former Haitian President Jean-Bertrand Aristide after his kidnapping, as my friend would say, in 2004. So what have we done on this side to close the knowledge gap in higher education, especially at the University of the West Indies, and have our efforts work to address racism and not just towards social justice? That's the question mark in the theme for our session. Briefly, we have used history education as a pedagogical tool to examine the roots of racism and social injustice in the Caribbean, and to train graduates to engage in applied history in our efforts to effect change in the larger society. We have established a Center for Reparation Research at the instruction of the heads of government of CARICOM, which is working with the University of Glasgow and Brown on the Masters in Reparation Justice. The strategic plan of the University of the West Indies under our Vice Chancellor, Sir Hilary Beckles, is in fact grounded in what he calls the AAA strategy, the strategic plan for access, agility, and alignment to the needs of the region. In educating our people outside of the classroom, some UWI academics have become revolutionary intellectuals, because to be a revolutionary intellectual, Walter Rodney says, helps to provide a point of reference to the struggle of Black liberation. If a panacea is a solution or remedy for difficulties or diseases, and if the disease we have been faced with in the Caribbean is colonialism, then the University of the West Indies was established to treat the diseases that the colonizers did not cure after being in the Caribbean for over 3 centuries, exploiting our human and natural resources for their own benefit, and leaving us physically and mentally sick as ever. The UWI, with British funds, started in 1948 as a medical school to address tropical diseases and its social manifestations, perhaps a sort of compensation for the centuries-old neglect, but would soon expand to embrace the humanities and engage in the writing and rewriting of Caribbean history. This, it was believed, would give our people a more liberating narrative of self. Why was this thought vital? The first professor of history at the University of the West Indies, Elsa Gavaya, provided the rationale. She said, In a region such as ours, where shame about the past too often fills the place that should be held by knowledge, knowledge of the past must play its part in our liberation from the bonds of the past. Revisionist history education was used, as I said, as a pedagogical tool in that project of liberation from the bonds of the past. The history departments of the University of the West Indies were tasked with engaging in the project of decolonizing the colonial narratives and African identity theft that sought to mentally enslave the descendants of enslaved Africans. Staff in the three departments on all the three initial campuses joined the communities of scholars, the global scholars, to destabilize the colonialist historiography, presenting the Caribbean people as victims of colonialism, yes, but also as survivors of the Ma'afa and contributors to Caribbean and world civilizations. Historians, many trained at the University of the West Indies, provided the historical justification for the elevation of our own icons and showed where history sits at the crossroads of monuments, memorials, and memorialization after the atrocity of enslavement. The philosophies guiding the historical archaeology in which we engaged since the 1950s resided in the works of regional and diasporic scholars. Eric Williams provided the hard facts of Europe's economic underdevelopment of the Caribbean, illustrating in his 1944 work, Capitalism and Slavery, that the Caribbean was the site of the formation of European ideas of modernity and their construction of notions of hegemony. And all of us who live in the Caribbean space have been deeply offended by the actualization of such notions of hegemony and countered with our own counter discourse, countered such notions with our own counter discourses. Marcus Garvey encouraged us to regard ourselves as Africans and reconnect with Africa. Molefe Kete Asante inspired us with his theory of Afrocentricity, and Sheikh Anta Diop firmly connected us to pre-colonial African civilizations and cultures. We use the gendered historical research of Lucille Mathurin Mayer, the rehabilitative ideas of Frantz Fanon and Amos Césaire, the work of Haiti of C.L.R. James, and the revolutionary precepts of Walter Rodney as he showed how Europe underdeveloped Africa. We took practical steps at the university, introducing courses that would reorient the thinking of our students away from pro-colonialism, especially as it related to the representations of indigenous peoples and African people. Our historians have rooted out the myths of extinction of the indigenous peoples, told the truth about Columbus and his financial backers, about who must bear the bulk of the responsibility for the African Holocaust, about colonialism and its deforming impact, about the true freedom fighters who were African soldiers and non-military people with boots on the ground who forced abolition and emancipation, destabilizing the Wilberforce mania that erupts in the UK ever so often. We have looked at the roots of Caribbean underdevelopment, including the indecency of the compensation paid to enslavers at the time of emancipation and the scam called the apprenticeship system. And finally, we have taught about the struggle for decolonial justice through the franchise movement, labor protests, independence, and reparatory justice. Today, no one believes in the myth of discovery, in the post-conquest work's tendency to negate or minimize the role of the indigenous peoples in the advance of Caribbean modernity, presenting both text and subtext that projected perceptions of the indigenous Caribbeans as a problem for colonial development and an obstacle to the European march to progress. In the characterization of our heroes and heroines as rabble-rousers and criminals who upset the peace of plantation society, the peace and so-called stability of plantation society through their activism. We have taught all of that. The Eurocentric tendencies of the earlier works, and what I mean is that we have destabilized those kinds of myths. So the Eurocentric tendencies of the earlier works were increasingly overtaken by the revisionist approaches of a new generation of scholars who have questioned the essentialism of the traditional historiography and master narratives imposed on former colonized peoples, and they introduced their own discursive practices. In the post-1970s in particular, there were renewed attempts, though not always successful, to dethrone the old intellectual absolutisms and introduce new interpretations of Caribbean history. The history of the Caribbean continues to attract the attention of modern scholars on both sides of the Atlantic. The perspectives have not been unified, rather two distinct trends are still observable in the writings on the colonial Caribbean, one imperialist, colonialist, the other distinctly revisionist, and located firmly in the Creole or Black nationalist genre. Because history is not a mandatory discipline, however, other means have to be used to teach about the past and how it is relevant to the present, and the potential of history education to foster pride, dignity, and a sense of belonging to Africans on this side, who still have not all rid themselves of the negative images they see on their TV screens. It was Nelson Mandela who said about history, it is always important to look at your history. You cannot really be proud of yourself if you do not know your history. Walter Rodney's method of groundings with his brothers and sisters is therefore much used, along with media, to allow our people to understand the roots of racism, the impact of identity theft, and the road we all must travel to end Caribbean disfigurement at the hands of colonizers. We must, of course, insist that reparatory justice is due to us from those who gave no respectable golden handshake to independence negotiators, so that they could truly address the colonial mess of landlessness, poverty, structural discrimination in education, inadequate social infrastructure, slums, slumification, environmental degradation, which has had an impact on climate change. Finally, let me say it is a work in progress for higher educational institutions. But we take comfort in these words from Osagyefo, Kwame, and Nkrumah. The forces that unite us are intrinsic and greater than the superimposed influences that keep us apart. Together we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Shepherd, for those wonderful insights and really keeping our focus to where our focus needs to be. Your themes about more to keep us together and between us than to divide us is so important, and we need to keep thinking about that and remembering that, and the whole idea about the true history, and I guess the issue of the divide in terms of how Caribbean is researched and discussed in the literature and the whole difference, I guess, that shows the divide between HBCUs and other universities. I am presuming you didn't make that final point, but I'm sure that's where you were going with that. And so there's an obligation to continue to do research on our part so that the real truth is known, that the real truth is actually told. It's not much different from why we have, for example, African-American newspapers in the US, right? So that the real truth can be told. And so that's wonderful. And I think your research and the things you're doing are really the underpinnings for something that I'm hoping might be really great, that may be around the corner for people who have been discriminated against for so many years around the world, and there really is not a difference. And so I want to go to our next speaker, and I think it's important to note that our next speaker is from Delaware State, and indeed global studies are one of his areas of expertise, and Africa in the international system is another matter of expertise, and informational political economy and global studies. I think those are areas that are extremely important to us. And I know that one of the things in our discussions that Dr. Akwasi Osei tried to keep us in the focus was actually being together, because there's sometimes the divide in the whole reparations movement. And I think that, as we discussed, there's no real reason to pick a side, because as our speakers have said, Dr. Shepard just said, we're really all in this together. And I think that that's a really great way of looking at that. But I know that Dr. Osei has talked about the need for getting more of an idea of being supportive of Pan-Africanism within even the groups of African-American professors around the country and really around the world. So I think that's kind of an interesting concern that he has. But anyway, let's please welcome from Delaware State, and he is the Associate Dean of the College of Humanities, Education and Social Sciences, Historically Black College in Delaware, Dr. Akwasi P. Osei. Dr. Osei?
Yes, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Thank you, Gary. I'm hearing a feedback. Okay. I'm happy to be here, and I thank the AAU for inviting me to contribute the little that I can to this engagement. It's been clear to me that all of us have been involved in this without even officially declaring so. We're just in the process of finalizing and officializing all these relationships that we've been building for years. It appears as if Pete was reading my notes, because everything Pete said is what I've literally put down. So without, stealing too much of your time, what I'm going to do is to go straight to the point and respond to the topic as I thought I would do, because we only had 10 minutes. And if there are any questions regarding any of the points that I'm going to lay out, I'll be happy to respond to them later. Also, I have to let you know that it's been a very tough morning at Delaware State. Unfortunately, 300 students had an off-campus party, and there was a shooting, and one person died out of my college. So I've been on the phone and on Zoom with the university administrators trying to deal with that. So, but I told them that this conference is my life, so there's no way I'm gonna miss it. So if I've been getting up and going, it's because we're still dealing with that. And it's a tough spot for us. Anyway, higher education, as we have known it, has not been a panacea to racism and promoting racial justice, for all the reasons that both Verene and Pete said. Higher education has maintained the status quo. Now, if the status quo is colonialism, and again, the previous speakers have made mention of this, then there's no way it can lead to a panacea, especially when the status quo is to maintain the traditional civilizing mission objective of those who saw fit to appropriate our labor and ourselves to make them rich, essentially. And this essentially is the creation of white supremacy. Higher education has not given access to all. If anything, it has served in much of the continent, and certainly in these United States, it has served to maintain class positions. And sometimes we're all at fault in not recognizing that indeed we're all practicing classism you know, on the idea that the most important thing to talk about is race. Higher education may be a necessary, but not a sufficient condition to combat racism and social justice. And by that I mean, yes, it may have a role to play. Pete said that. He's correct, absolutely. I wouldn't have spent all these years in universities if I didn't believe that. But the struggle has always been, how does one use it to respond to actual conditions that we're facing? It can be a part of the answer, as I just described, towards fighting and erasing racial inequality, but it certainly cannot be a panacea. A point that we need to maintain and understand and put in front of us is that whatever the social conditions are of which we're a part, we need to be a part concretely, not in a very standoffish way. In other words, if we're a part of a particular city setting, in an environment where a university is located, we need to be involved in the conditions and the issues that face those who are our neighbors, essentially. For Africans and other peoples of African descent, higher education was always created to produce a particular type of person. I think that's precisely part of what Verene was saying. Dr. Shepard was making that point. No matter how enlightened we may become, as long as we were trained to maintain the neo-colonial systems that we let in place, that would not be the answer to the problems that higher education should be leading to. In Africa, it was set up to maintain, as I said, the neo-colony, and essentially, literally, go from wherever we're living into the nice white bungalows of our colonial oppressors. And outside the continent, for instance, in these United States, it is also to maintain essentially the same thing and produce some leaders who would maintain the status quo. Inequities and social injustices are a direct result of the colonial enterprises worldwide. And this global theme that I see coming from everybody is refreshing, because it's the only way to attack the problem, where Europeans created a hierarchy of cultures that had them at the top, Africans at the bottom, and all the others in between, until we're able to make our students understand this system of which they're a part, whether they're in Delaware State, Alabama State, Howard University, University of Ghana, wherever we are as people of African descent, we are dealing with this hierarchical structure that needs to be taken out. And if our education continues to maintain students who are not even aware of this, it will be difficult to deal with social issues and fighting inequity. The hierarchy of cultures is real, and we need to confront that. Now, if higher education was to help shepherd, we do apologies to Verene, the new nations on the continent to freedom, then our institutions of higher education have failed us. I cannot tell you how many times I've gone to all the universities in wherever African country I've gone in. And as you begin to talk to the people, they're so focused on the minutiae of their specific campuses that these larger issues find themselves missing. It's not enough to know. Everybody can be taught. Everybody can be taught. So it's not enough to know. It's more important to understand, and even more so, ask yourself, how does this knowledge implicate my life? How do I find a way If I find an inequity, how do I respond to that? How do we get students to critically evaluate this knowledge? Like I said, everybody can be taught. You can read, you can see, you can understand. But if you don't have any idea of the political environment in which you reside, that knowledge can go to naught. Pan-African thinking, I believe, is not only essential, it is almost natural in this global situation we're in. I cannot imagine anybody who says they know the history of our peoples not having a Pan-African mindset. So even if it was in 1900 that we started having those meetings, the Pan-African meetings, centuries before, our people were thinking in that perspective. There's no question that, and I'll give two examples that I always give my students. Kunta Kinte. Was Kunta Kinte a Pan-Africanist? I don't know, I'll leave it for people to think. But here is a person who understood self-worth. And he understood it so well that he was prepared to endure whatever it took to get back to what made him who he was. And the second example was always my discovery many years ago at Oberlin. My freshman year, coming from Ghana, reading David Walker's Appeal. It was an eye-opener, and with apologies to Gary and Willie, I always wanted to be a big-time lawyer. It was clear to me that that was not the way to go, that I needed to understand more what David Walker was all about. Pan-African thinking is important. When Walker said his appeal was to his brothers around the world, but expressly to his peoples in these United States, he understood, he was thinking in a global manner. And it's important that we all adopt that mindset. And education is not necessarily consciousness raising. In my experience, I have found out that that is what we don't do well, consciousness raising. And I hope that we'll focus a little bit on that, because it is knowing how to use your knowledge to better oneself and to better the community that we need to concentrate on. So those are the points I wanted to raise, and I'll leave it here.
Okay. Doc, I think that was well said, and I think we. You would have been a great lawyer, trial lawyer, but you made the right choice, because I think you're helping to put this all together, and we truly appreciate it. But I even love your leadership, because I noticed how you guided things in our discussions early on. So I think that you've got a lot of work still to do, and so I think you're in the right place at the right time. So we're appreciative, and you know, but you would have been a great lawyer. Okay,
let's pray for the student who died last night at that party.
Yeah, I walked away and didn't hear that, so I apologize. And I did understand there was some event there last night with the students, and that's disappointing that you had the event and even for a student to die. So,
and they were not supposed to do that.
Yeah, that's one of the problems with young people, and you know, I see that it's disappointing. We'll have to pray for that young student and their families, because they must be going through some really torturous thinking today. And I know that all the others who were there and who witnessed and saw and observed, they must be needing counseling right now. And so, you know, God is with all that were there and can bring some level of comfort. I know those things are always difficult, and with a young life, it's even much more difficult to comprehend, to understand, and digest. Our next presenter is Dr. Bertrade Ngo-Ngijol Banoum. She is the chair of Afrikaner Studies at Lehman College of the City University of New York. She's the former director of Women's and Gender Studies. She has special knowledge in the African women's verbal art and knowledge production, the Afrikaner women's movements, both local and global, and the integration of American indigenous knowledge systems into global academic agendas and discourses. She received her bachelor's in Cameroon, her master's in Scotland, and her doctorate in England. So she indeed is well traveled, and one of the issues she wants to engage relates to the actual academy and how there can be more justice, equity in the actual academy itself. And I'm always envious of where she's located, as you'll see when she comes to present. But I want to please welcome and acknowledge our next great expert, Dr. Banoum.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, everybody?
I can, so I think everyone probably can.
Okay. Greetings again from, I nearly said New York City, but you can see where I am in my heart. My name again, Bertrade Ngo-Ngijol Banoum. I hail from the beautiful country of Cameroon, where we were colonized by the British and the French. I come from the French-speaking part of the place, and one of the things I remember is how you were not allowed to speak your mother tongue. You know, you were not allowed to speak your African mother tongue. I will not develop that further, but just to show you where I'm coming from, where I saw many kids being punished and humiliated because they spoke their mother tongue. Fast forward, I found myself in New York City. As Dr. Silva said earlier, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for education. So at New York, I teach at Lehman College, which is part of the City University of New York, which happens to be the largest urban public university in the US, with 25 campuses across the 5 boroughs of New York. Lehman College was founded in 1931 as the Bronx. For those of you who are familiar with New York, the Bronx is one of the most diverse boroughs with a lot of Black people and people of African descent. So first we were a Hunter College branch, but then the college was established as fully so in 1967. And the name Lehman is a former governor of the state, Herbert, who was also a US senator and who also worked for the United Nations emergency during the Second World War. And he was a great philanthropist. That is important because Lehman College was also the place where the United Nations first met and where the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed, so that we have a monument representing that on campus. I'm sharing those facts to show how important in our foundation, human rights and social justice are theoretically supposed to be. Now, The college has, as a community, has an unwavering commitment to embody those values underlying the hallmarks by providing quality higher education to all students who come to Lehman. And our students, 2/5 of them were born outside of the United Nations, and most of them are the first generation to attend college. So you can just imagine that they are determined to succeed and turn around things for their families, where they are usually the center of life. They are their parents' translators. They're their parents' really lifeline to the outside world. Now, in this institution, what have we done apart from being named for a champion of human rights? What have we done to address systemic and institutional racism? That is really, as our keynote speaker, Dr. Silva, said, the universities cannot be detached from society as a whole, as we know. So it took the civil rights movement protests of the 1960s for Black and Puerto Rican students to be emboldened and empowered to start demanding racial equality and social justice across the university. Because until then, the City University of New York was overwhelmingly white. The sustained student protests led to what is officially called open admission.
You got it, you got it.
And this is major because this made it possible for Black, Latino, Caribbean students to now join the university. So this was a pretty important milestone. And at the time we are speaking now, the overwhelming majority of our students, about 70%, are Black, Latino, and Caribbean. So just think about that from the beginning. The students also demanded changes in academic programming and staffing. They demanded changes and representation in the curriculum that was really essentially grounded in Eurocentric tenets of education as we know. And we know what it means for people like us. The student also demanded creation of a Black Studies department, and those days, a Puerto Rican department, a Puerto Rican Studies department, which is today Latin American, Latino, and Caribbean Studies department. Our Department of Black Studies is called today Department of Afrikaner Studies. So in 1969 was the establishment of those two departments. And this shows you the power of protest. How many students, often immigrants, Black, and they came together, and people who were there tells us that the leaders were actually locked inside their offices. They couldn't leave because the students said, we want change. So our department in this sort of environment is very important, as you can see. The Department of Afrikaner Studies brings a body of knowledge that records, describes, analyzes the experience of Black people in all parts of the world, but especially in America, the Caribbean, and Africa. In Sankofa spirit, we appraise our past, examine the present, and seek to shape a just future through an interdisciplinary major leading to a Bachelor of Art. Our work cannot afford to just be academic. So while we offer a high quality academic training, we are very much rooted in our communities. Our communities here in the Bronx and beyond. We want our students to have a culture of excellence in education and also in community activism, so they can grasp the importance of making their research objective relevant to the Black community within the United Nations, the United States, and throughout the diaspora. But before those students can really do it, let us also say what our colonization did that Dr. Shepherd and others referred to earlier on, and what writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o has called the colonization of the mind. We usually don't know ourselves. So we really start with this existential question: who am I? Who am I? And all of us sitting here, because until we can know ourselves on our own terms, other people will always tell us, as the African saying goes, if the lion doesn't write its story, the hunter will. So in answering this question, we've really gone back to the huge reservoir of our knowledge bases, and we know we have a lot of it. But has that been taught to our students? Has that been taught to us? I can tell you, as somebody who had my first degree in my country, we were really not studying Africa, let alone the African diaspora. We first started studying what was called African literature as a product of the civil rights movement in America and our pioneering Pan-Africanists who we introduced to our students for them to know they stand on the shoulders of great scholars. In responding to this question, who am I? We need to dispel the myth, the stereotypes that denigrate Black people as people with no knowledge, no history, no science, no art. That has been the Eurocentric teaching. We have to uncover and center stage our Afrocentric systems of knowledge in the academy. And that's what we do. And knowledge we have, and a lot of it that sometimes has been stolen and presented as not ours because we were not supposed to have any knowledge. Our role is to integrate the groundbreaking scholarship of our pioneers from the Harlem Renaissance in America, in our backyard here at Lehman, as we usually say, to Negrismo in Latin America and the Caribbean, to Negritude in Paris, where Black students met from Africa, from the Caribbean, and that will be people like Leopold Sédar Senghor, Aimé Césaire, Léon Gontran Damas, and said, enough, this is who we are. Don't tell us who we are. And when Marcus Garvey joined them, the French people, the French government was very uncomfortable. And yes, we have to make people uncomfortable. We have those great scholars and thinkers who have brought forth African philosophical thought. And our young people need to know this. These people stood up for our self-affirmation, self-determination, self-expression, and self-actualization. And our young people need to know that. In the movement of negritude, for example, we had great women like Paulette and Alice Nadal, who were the first to write an article called The Awakening of Black Consciousness. Because when we talk about Black people, we also have to look at gender dynamics. We usually hear about the three fathers of negritude, but there were also mothers. And the women I mentioned were those mothers. Awakening our students' consciousness to the fact that we stand on the shoulders of great foremothers, such as Nana Asantewa in Ghana, who stood up to the British colonialists and said, no, we will not take this. Ana Jinga of Bada in Angola, who did the same with the Portuguese, who were charting our continent. Closer to us, we've had fighters, warrior women like Wangari Maathai, who stopped her government and the multinational corporation deforesting her country and other African countries. And she was recognized by the world to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. Lima Bowe in Liberia, who organized ordinary women to stop a 14-year-long war devastating the country and have the first ever woman elected president in not just Liberia, but Africa as a whole. These are just a few examples to say that we have a lot of work to do, but first, telling our students that they come from greatness and nobody should tell them the contrary. African civilization is the blueprint of world civilization. We look into the vast knowledge contained in our oral traditions. Through our presentations here, we've heard about a lot of our wisdom through proverbs, and we have more than that. We have epics, legends, we have all types of systems of knowledge that need to be validated. And if not by us, by whom? Now, you notice I've been talking about Afrikaner Studies or Latino Studies. Just imagine the college without those departments. Because I can tell you, we were the first to be able to offer within the Department of English to offer African American literature. Just fancy that, African literature, or nobody would. Our students would never read our great writers that you know. That knowledge has been coming from the Department of Afrikaner Studies. We are the ones who require readings of those authors. Otherwise, what do our students read? How can they learn they come from greatness when all they read is people, as I myself really educated in Africa? I always thought all the writers were white, especially white dead men. We bring those to our students so that we are trying our best, but as you can see, this process has to go beyond the Department of Afrikaner Studies to be scaled up across campus. Because the other scenario that we have is who takes Afrikaner courses? Who takes Latin American and Caribbean courses? If I gave you a quiz, you might probably guess, it's often Black students. So do you see the point I'm trying to make here? If we really want not just our people, but others to know who we are, what we have accomplished, they have to be taking those courses, because so often they're talking about us on our behalf about matters they do not know? Why is it that even when the courses are offered, they do not take them? This is something to think about. We have some good political will. Recently, our university, for the first time since its creation, has a Puerto Rican chancellor, a Puerto Rican vice chancellor. And since they started, they prioritize the so-called ethnic studies within CUNY. And they recently earned a very substantive grant from some foundation. And they want to make sure that ethnic studies is heightened and broadened and expanded. And we are hoping that with all this work, we can really continue the job of decolonizing our university and reimagining higher education that is more equitable and just, an academy that is for everybody and centers us all. Thank you.
Dr. Banoum, that was really outstanding, and I truly would love to see exactly what works you have in reference to listing some of the great accomplishments that maybe we didn't learn in our history about what many, for example, African women have done in their nations and bringing nations to their knees and winning Nobel Prizes are all really tremendous things to cite and to discuss and to let people know about. And you know, President Johnson of the NAACP earlier talked about one of the things he is thinking of is what kinds of things the NAACP can promote in terms of enhancing the image of Africa and what kinds of positive images to get out there and present. It almost sounds like you two need to have a conversation, because it sounds like what you spoke to was actually what he was reaching out to ask about. You know, thank you all. You know, we're because we started late. I know we're getting towards the end of when we were supposed to finish. So why don't we? I know we have asking everyone to do 10 minutes and to limit their presentation to 10 minutes. So we've got one more presenter here, and then maybe we can have a question or two after that. And so our final presenter is Dr. David Nini Ampa-Benin. He is a professor, retired commissioner of police of Ghana. He has special knowledge of police intelligence, security, crisis analysis, and protests, and also professional standards is an issue that he's an expert on. And so I think those are all really important issues in reference to the debate and discussion, because I think that we know that whenever you move into nations where persons of African descent are not in the majority, that there is frequently found an issue with how they're handled by police or what have you. And so I think this information obviously has great value all around. And I know he wants to speak to that issue because it's become somewhat, it's fueled an international discussion after the murder of George Floyd. And it's good to hear a chief of police or a commissioner of police that has some of the views and some of the innovative ideas that retired Police Commissioner Ampa-Benin has. So our final speaker before we have a few questions would be Chief Ampa-Benin. Chief, Commissioner.
Yeah, hello everyone. I think he's not around. I think he left. Maybe he has internet problems.
Okay, he left. Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, it's disappointing that we lost him. So why don't we go to the next? For questions, is anyone? I think we're going to use the chat box for questions. I know one thing that came through that was intriguing. I think that Dr. Shepard had her DNA analyzed and indicated that her roots are in Cameroon. So she, yeah, and so she sent a sister shout out to you, Dr. Verene.
Thank you. I hadn't looked at that.
Well, that was probably a nice, pretty, a nice thing to find out.
That's why we need to keep talking, you know?
Yeah.
Well, let me be a fly in the ointment to say that can Verene go home in Cameroon?
I would like not. What a question.
You know why I'm asking?
Yes, I know.
I always want to make sure that as much as we want to claim, we need to get the home situation taken care of.
Yeah,
I see what you mean. Yeah,
You see what I mean?
I see what you mean.
Okay.
yes.
At my age, that's all I'm thinking about.
I get you. I totally get you. That we are working on that. But
there you go.
Those problems, you see where they all started. Colonization.
That's right.
That's
Remember?
right. Yeah.
You know?
I've been watching the situation and waiting for an opportunity.
Yeah. My sister, now you have somebody who will be holding your hand here. Thank you for sharing that.
That's great. So I don't see any questions in the chat. So let me put this out here. I think I see many areas of the discussion that are invited, but I'm on to focus in on two different areas because I think they're important. One is we want to make a case for reparations, correct? We want to make a case to say that people have benefited from lands and resources, from countries owned by persons of African descent, and there have been all kinds of exploitation. So I would like to go to Dr. Shepard to start out and ask her one of the things, if she might mention in her research, because I think it's pertinent to this overall subject, what are some of the current things that are occurring that are ongoing? You know, like when you litigate these cases, like when we litigate, for example, affirmative action cases, you look at the issue of whether there's current discrimination, whether there are the current effects of past discrimination to try to address issues like a statute of limitation. Because I know I'd like to, ask Willie Gary what he thinks about that kind of idea today. I'm one of the lawyers that filed a reparations suit back in Chicago about 15 years ago. So I mean, I know a lot of suits have been filed. None have been successful. We did win one thing at the Seventh Circuit, but we ended up not getting anything out of the case. But anyway, so Dr. Shepard, what you want to bring us? What examples might you give us of current discrimination deserving of repair, or the current effects from past matters that are tangible that we can sink our teeth into?
Thank you. Well, let me say that since 2013, the reparation movement in the Caribbean has a long genealogy, starting from the activism for enslaved ancestors and their fight for freedom, because they knew that their entrapment in Babylon was a violation of their human rights. So we start there. And we have often used Randall Robinson's book, The Debt, which has a very great letter from Jordan of Big Spring, Tennessee, who wrote to his former enslaver in 1865 to ask for reparation. And that's a very good strategy. And if you look at that letter, it sets out why he thinks reparation is due. So in the Caribbean, Rastafari, for them, is repatriation to Africa that they are seeking. Their form of repatriate justice is in the form of the British state financing repatriation to Africa, negotiating with African governments for resettlement. So that's one. But since 2013, academics have been have joined the movement, more academics. And we know since 2013, the CARICOM heads of government have established a CARICOM Reparation Commission. They have established a prime ministerial subcommittee on reparation headed by the Honorable Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, and including 4 other heads of government. And then out of that came the establishment of the Center for Reparation Research. So we have, Rastafari brought a case about 10 or so years ago that didn't end up being successful. Right now there's a petition being drawn up. The government of Jamaica has debated the issue in Parliament. There's now a bipartisan motion to go ahead. So what we're doing is using historical justification, but we're also showing, and the center is doing a lot of research on this, it's not only about what happened to enslaved Africans through the Ma'afa. It's the capitalization of the African Holocaust. It's the banks and institutions, universities in the UK and other places. It's financial institutions, it's insurance companies like Lloyd's Bank, but it's also about continuing harm. Trying to negotiate what generally is called a golden handshake. They were rebuffed. And so Britain harm. There is continuing legacy. So reparation for the Caribbean people is not only about the historical wrongs, and we have so much evidence of that. It's also about the legacies of colonialism. So when we do bring that case, it is going to be a combination. But in terms of the legal case, I'm not a lawyer, but of course, you know, lawyers are on our team. And next year, February, there's going to be a huge legal meeting in Jamaica, organized by the president of something called AACIL, I think the American Society of International Lawyers, but the honorary president is an ICJ judge who's a Jamaican, and he's pioneering this historic conference. So we are using historians, we are using Rastafari, we are using academics. I told you about the MA in Reparation Justice, which is going to be online next year. We're also working with Brown University and the University of Glasgow, and with our African Center in Lagos, to ensure that we have a diasporic interest in what we're doing and getting help from our brothers and sisters. We are linked into INOSAR in the UK as well as NAACP in the USA. So it's active, it's alive, it's just. And whereas universities and financial institutions have been owning up to their responsibility and talking reparation in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, the states have been reticent. But we continue our work.
Oh, that's a great groundwork, and I think that's a good structure to look at, and it's good to know that there's that meeting upcoming of lawyers who are going to be discussing that. I don't know if Mr. Gare, I know he's still on there, but I see his photo is not there, but it'd be great to have him comment on this. But you know, so I don't know if any others have comments on that topic, or the other idea obviously is, since we've kind of all discussed the idea of what needs to be done in reference to having more social justice become part of the discussion at universities. And I know that we heard Dr. Silver give some very good and specific recommendations in terms of an action plan. What thoughts would you all put forth in terms of, if we're going to do more within the HBCU community? What steps do you see that must be taken, or what steps must be taken in the outside community? Because I know that one thing that Bertrade just talked about was the idea of the sit-ins, et cetera, in the 60s in New York that led to the creation of the African Studies departments, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, what's kind of interesting is today is that there are all these anti-movements that are there, and the whole idea of calling these things politically correct movements. And so there's so much backlash today, even more than there was before, which is really kind of interesting. But we've seen a real change in that trend. So, you know, that's a discussion too as to how one makes those things happen, because they seem to be just logical and intuitive to all of us and people of goodwill, but actually achieving those may be more difficult than what we'd like to acknowledge or to admit, because like Akwasi says, you know, in some ways the curriculum, the whole structure is designed to perpetuate a certain system that is about supremacy or division. So would love to know what your thoughts are, and I won't call on in any person. I'll allow you to unmute and present the issue, because we don't have a hand thing, and so I'll just say any of the presenters want to tackle that or discuss that.
Yeah, I'll start off, sir. I believe in intentionality, and what I mean by that is, when I look at the curriculum at our HBCUs and look at the curriculum of our predominantly white institutions, with few exceptions, you don't see too many differences. And I can recall when I became provost at Savannah State, I remember making a statement that was taken out of context. I said, there's nothing magic about HBCUs unless we make the magic happen through our curriculum, through the people that we hire and the students that we serve and send out. Of course, the local paper only printed the first part. Dr. Silver said there's nothing magic about HBCUs. And the point that I was making was that I had come from Kennesaw State University, which is now the largest, one of the largest institutions in the state of Georgia. And I was also the assistant vice chancellor for the state system. So I had purview over all of the state colleges and universities in the academic setting. And when I compared what I saw when I got to Savannah State to what I saw across the system, there was no difference. And so one of the things that I began to do was to be a little bit more intentional, working with the faculty to say, what distinguishes us from the others? And it has to be grounded in our understanding of Africa and Pan-Africanism. It has to be grounded in our understanding of where we came as a people. And so we did see curricular changes that impacted our school in a great way. We also started the first study abroad program that still exists. And that's been 20 years ago. We started doing tours, and I see my brother Osei is there, and Osei accompanied me on the very first trip that I took with the American Association of Blacks in Higher Education, because I felt that I had done everything right in terms of preparation, but we needed somebody authentic to make things work. And of course, Osei, my brother, was the person that I chose to go with us, and he did an excellent job. So the point that I'm making is that even today, as we begin to address these social justice issues, it's going to have to be intentional. It can't be left to someone's happenstance. But one of the things that I am at least feeling good about, because in the protest in Atlanta, I was participating in the protest. I was out with the young people. And what I was saying to them, it's good to protest, but are we going to also see you on November 3rd to vote? But the thing that encouraged me about that was I saw a mixed group of people asking for the same thing for the first time in a long time. And I think therein lies part of the solution, because as my sister said earlier, at her school, when she opens the courses to teach, only people of color come to learn. So our other brothers, white brothers and sisters, they don't want to know because they benefit from the structure as it presently exists.
I think that's well said. And one of the things I would interested, you gave a number of examples of what some countries or some universities were doing, but you mentioned earlier about there should be social justice curricula. And I know you'd mentioned a number of universities that had that. You must have mentioned about 8 or 10 of them. I tried to write down as many as I could, but are there specific samples of social justice curricula? Is there like a place you go and you see that? Let's say we're saying we would like to do this, but there are specific curricula that you've endorsed, that you've looked at, that you think would be good if others are interested at some of the universities and want to start looking at that and maybe having a way of integrating that into the
I can't say I've endorsed it, but I've seen some. But I just thought from the premise that the programs and policies will only be achieved when we see the promotion and protection of rights regardless of race and class. So that has to be what the program has to be undergirded in. Mm-hmm. The rhetoric is not what we're looking for. It's the substance of understanding that these curriculums, these policies have to promote and protect students and people regardless of race and class.
Well, it's kind of interesting in the sense that I do know you mentioned George Mason. You know, George Mason actually is one of the schools that has the Antonin Scalia Law School that is suing Harvard and others, anti-affirmative action. They've kind of had a bit of a conservative bent, so I wonder about their social justice. That's kind of provoked that thought.
I think their program might have been in reaction to that. Okay. But they have a master's program now in social justice and human rights.
Okay, and I think I saw Dr. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, if I may just jump in quickly to say that during the discussion, during the presentations, I think the issue was raised of whether the university system established by former masters or colonizers can really deliver on social justice. And the impression I was getting was that in the United States of America, there's the belief that it has not really fulfilled that role of, decolonial justice and destabilizing, colonialism and so on, except for the historically Black colleges. But I think that one of the points I really wanted to restate for the University of the West Indies is that it was established in 1948 by Britain. And you could say that was part of our compensation, but that's not enough anyway. It started as a medical school precisely to correct the diseases in the region, real diseases, and the establishment of the existence of slums and so on. But once we began to train academics at the University of the West Indies on all 3 campuses, I mean, that's our university supported by 17 countries. And, but we have 3 landed campuses and an open campus. I think we had a different commitment. Most of us who initially had access would have perhaps been privileged. But I think during the Michael Manley regime, access was opened up to people like me from the working class, from rural poverty. And that access has broadened. And the lecturers, when we then became, lecturers and professors, we changed the curriculum. We have had a social justice mission. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned, we don't only teach and try to eliminate the myths of the past and the Eurocentricity. We do applied history. We are out there with schools, with our communities, with you like today. I have traveled across many African countries talking about the Caribbean. So it's, I think our academics have, you know, like a twin project. The problem is that many of the leaders are not as convinced as academics about what needs to be done. That's why history is not a mandatory subject. Unless we have compulsory history education, I think our people will continue to feel disconnected from their past. If you ask children today, are you African? They'll tell you no, because they are not being encouraged in the other spaces to embrace Africa. But the movement for reparatory justice, I think, grounded in historical justification, I think is shifting a little bit. And right now, the recent poll about moving the monarchical system for Jamaica shows over 50% saying yes, whereas 60% used to say no. And Barbados has now announced it will get rid of the monarchical system by next year. So I think we have used Walter Rodney's methodology of conscientizing to ensure that we don't imprison ourselves within the walls of academia. So there's a greater commitment, I think, and greater change in the curriculum at our university, even though it's on a plantation, former plantation, and some people say, you know, the colonialist mentality has not completely disappeared. That's why I ended by saying it's a work in progress still.
Dr. Shepherd, you really articulated very well my point, and that is the intentionality of what you all have done and is doing.
That's why I commented.
That's what is needed in these schools, the intentionality.
And I think they're saying the session should be ending very soon. So we haven't, I know that Akwasi and Bertrade may both have some comments. I'd love if they would focus on the idea of whether the newfound awakeness around the world brought upon by the tragic death and the murder of George Floyd, if that provides some opportunity for us now to try to take the mantle and try to proliferate more of the kinds of curriculum and understandings on the university campuses around the world that might help make a difference.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that one of the really important thing I got from Dr. Silva's presentation, this was already afternoon, is that notion of intentionality and really including social justice in our mission statement. Because when he said that, it sent me to our mission statement, you know, that I know, but I just wanted to make sure. It reads that the college serves the Bronx and surrounding brethren, etc. But the closest mention of social justice is it embraces diversity. You know, that is the closest. So something I'm taking out of this meeting really is going to be a fight so that social justice is actually stated there, because this is policy and it is going to be very significant, because my college has had good political will. You know, as I said earlier, for example, we have a Center for Human Rights and Peace, right? And a minor that we offer. Last year, before all the protests, we inaugurated a social justice speaker series. So that shows an awareness and the will to do something, but it needs to be institutionalized, really. And talking about our department specifically, it's good that Gary mentioned the backlash of the 1960s, you know, as to why were we having these departments. I can tell you it has never stopped, you know, it has never stopped. And recently you all followed the president's dictate that there should not be any training on anti-racist. I hope you see the gravity of that. For us, it was just, what exactly does that mean? It just took us back to those days where our departments were deemed not academic and that they should not exist. So we're really just people of struggle. It's never easy. There's always that pushback of many people who think ethnic studies department are lesser than. I have reports from students who, when they go to their advisors and they select an Afrikaner major, advisors asking them, why are you taking that? You know? And these are reality. So that's why it is very important. And let us also say, because of the colonial stratification, even some parents, let us acknowledge that. They tell their children, where is that going to take you? You know, a degree in Afrikaner Studies. So the work we're doing is having a lot of, because data is very important. Evidence and statistics that show what graduates in Afrikaner Studies have been able to accomplish. And I was actually blown away myself, how many of them get into medical schools, law schools. So that's the job we have. We have all that information showing students this is a full-fledged academic discipline and degree, and it gives you much more than others would. In addition to other knowledge, it teaches you who you are, where you're coming from. Because when these young people come on a minors, people haven't shown them that they know nothing, and we empower them. That goes a long way. So it is constant struggle, but we are here for it. And these times, of course, have made everything worse, as all of you know, where our departments are under assault. But we have a lot of programming. We have our own department speakers. I will be inviting some of you actually, because we want our students to know that it is their fight to continue, and we are all in it together.
Doctor, thank you so much, and I guess we'll have Akwasi to give us the last word. I want to thank the AAU for putting together such a great and distinguished panel. I think that we've all learned so much. It's been really tremendous, but I know they say we're over time, but we want to hear from Dr. Osei. So Akwasi, you want to go ahead?
I was just going to say that, I was just going to say that if there's one thing to take away, it is Pete Silver's point about intentionality.
Very important.
It seems like that seems to be the prevailing opinion. So I think Dr. Silver has nailed that one. So thanks to everyone. Thanks. I guess we'll see each other tomorrow. I think,
it's
I don't see Brother Gary's photo there. So yeah.
Tomorrow at 11 a.m. Is that right, Dr. Walker?
Yes, tomorrow at 11 a.m. We will start tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern time. So
Eastern time, that's right.
Yeah, I know you're in Delaware, I'm in Baltimore.
That's
so
right.
Eastern time tomorrow at 11 a.m. We'll be starting back in the small sessions. We won't be going to the plenary session. And this session, as Mr. Bledsoe mentioned earlier, we'll have Dr. Cornell West, as well as Dr. Hillary, the name is Beckles from Mona, from the University of the West Indies.
The Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, not from Mona, the entire West Indies.
The entire West Indies. And thank you very much. And so we encourage you all to come back and join us tomorrow for that session. We think that this session is going to be very large tomorrow. So please do go to diaspora at aau.org and double check the URL for tomorrow, because it was initially scheduled to be back here, but I've actually requested that they move us to the main room, because I suspect that because of the speakers tomorrow that this room is going to grow. So, so please.
Diaspora at AAU.
Diaspora.aau.org.
Yeah.
That was sent to us today by
Maxwell sent it to us yesterday.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow, and thank you for joining us. Although I want to say that I think that one of the other points that many of you made that I think is also important and very similar to what Dr. Silver said was about the language of the oppressor. You know, you talked, Dr. Shepard, about Frantz Fanon, and he said, you know, never use the language of the oppressor to describe yourself. And I think many of you talked about that, including Dr. Bertrade, and I think that's a really important point, that we have to educate ourselves and use our own language.
Very well said.
Thank you,
all
Gary.
so
Thank
much,
you guys.
Dr.
You guys be great.
We'll see you tomorrow.
And Bertrade, I'm still envious. I'm still
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and prayer for your students, and I hope peace.
I'll be calling
back.
you in a little bit.
Okay, all righty.
All right. Take care.
My newfound sister. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye.